Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching. The first light of dawn crept over the ramparts of Wolford Keep, painting the cold stones in hues of amber and rose. A soft mist still clung to the valley, rising like breath from the earth. The faint smell of damp hay, smoke, and horse sweat mixed in the morning air. Beyond the walls, peasants already stirred in the fields, their figures small and ghostly through the fog. Within the keep, life was beginning to move, slow, rhythmic, disciplined. Sir Geoffrey de Morland, a knight sworn to the Earl of Warwick, was already awake. His chamber was austere, a wooden cot, a chest, a small table with a candlestick, and above the doorway, a carved cross. A woolen cloak hung beside his sword. There was no luxury, no softness. A knight's life was bound by function, not comfort. His squire, young Thomas, had risen before dawn. He moved quickly and quietly through the small antechamber, heating water for his master's washing bowl and laying out the armor piece by piece. The chainmail glimmered faintly in the candlelight, each ring polished with ash and oil. The breastplate bore the marks of campaigns long past, dents from maces, scratches from arrows, and the faint etching of a lion, faded but proud. Sir Geoffrey sat upon the edge of his bed, running a hand over the wooden rosary that hung from his belt. His first words each morning were a prayer. He crossed himself slowly. Lord, grant that I may serve in honor, that my sword defend the weak, that I may fear thee more than the blade of my foe. Only after prayer did duty begin. Thomas approached with the basin. My lord, the water's warm. Geoffrey nodded, splashing the chill from his face. He dressed in linen and wool, garments worn close to the skin to soften the weight of armor. What news from the gate? He asked. The watchman reports riders from Coventry. They bear the Earl's seal. Geoffrey frowned. Then the rumors were true. He ate quickly. Coarse barley bread, a strip of salted pork, and watered ale. A knight's breakfast was not feast but fuel. Every mouthful carried purpose. The keep's courtyard was alive with sound when he stepped outside. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the whinnying of horses, the calls of men-at-arms drilling with wooden pikes. The castle's banners, blue and gold, hung limp in the still air, awaiting the day's wind. Sir Geoffrey crossed the yard toward the stables, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Inside, the smell of hay and animal musk greeted him. His destrier, a broad-chested warhorse named Aldred, stamped impatiently. The animal's mane was thick and black, its eye sharp with intelligence. Geoffrey ran a hand down its neck. Easy, lad. We may ride soon enough. In the training yard, young squires sparred under the watch of the master-at-arms. Wooden swords clattered against shields, echoing off the stone. Hold your guard, barked the instructor. Your shield is your life. Thomas paused to watch, wide-eyed. He would join their ranks soon, if he proved himself worthy. Knighthood was not won by birth alone, but by endurance. From the age of 7, boys of noble blood were sent to serve as pages in another lord's household. They learned manners, service, and obedience. At 14, they became squires, serving directly under a knight, tending his horse, carrying his gear, polishing his mail. Years of discipline forged both skill and humility. Only when a man had faced blood and fire could he earn the sword's blessing. Sir Geoffrey had been no different. He remembered his own years as a squire, the endless drills, the bruises, the sleepless nights before his first battle. And yet, through pain, he had found purpose. To be a knight was not merely to fight. It was to live by a code that bound a man's soul tighter than his armor. A horn sounded from the gatehouse, 2 long notes. A messenger. The courtyard fell silent. A rider approached, dust clinging to his cloak. His horse, foam-streaked, trembled with exhaustion. The man dismounted, bowing low. Sir Geoffrey de Morland, I am he, by order of the Earl of Warwick. All sworn men are to muster by noon. French ships were sighted off the Sussex coast. Raids near Hastings. Geoffrey's jaw tightened. God's wounds. So it begins. He turned to his squire. Thomas, see that my armor is readied. Oil the joints well. I'll not have it fail me in the field. Yes, my lord. By mid-morning, the keep was a hive of preparation. Armor clanged, horses snorted, and the armory's doors stood wide. Men checked straps and sharpened swords, each movement deliberate. Practice. A knight's life was constant readiness. Peace was but the pause between campaigns. Sir Geoffrey oversaw the mustering. The men-at-arms formed ranks in the courtyard, some veterans with weathered faces, others barely more than boys. Hold steady, he told them. Courage is not the absence of fear, but mastery of it. Before leaving, Geoffrey entered the small chapel beside the hall. Its air was cool and heavy with incense. A priest knelt before the altar, whispering the morning mass. Geoffrey bowed his head. If I fall, may I fall in grace, he murmured. Then he rose, taking up his helm and sword. The weight felt familiar, almost comforting, the gravity of duty resting upon his shoulders once more. Outside, the sun had climbed high. The courtyard shimmered with light, metal glinting like water. Thomas stood ready with the destrier. The squire's hands trembled slightly as he fastened the final buckle of the breastplate. You've done well, Geoffrey said quietly. When the day comes, you'll bear your own. He mounted Aldred in a single, fluid motion. The horse stamped and tossed its head, eager to run. Behind him, banners lifted in the rising wind, the sigil of Warwick, a white bear and ragged staff on crimson field. With a shout, the gates opened. Hooves struck stone, echoing like thunder through the valley. Sir Geoffrey led the column southward, the morning sun flashing upon the steel of 100 men. The road wound through farmland and forest, the rhythm of hooves mingling with the creak of leather and the jingle of bridles. Children waved from cottage doors. Peasants bowed as the riders passed. To them, knights were living symbols of protection, the mailed guardians of Christendom. Yet beneath the armor beat human hearts, weary and burdened by the cost of endless war. As they rode, Geoffrey's thoughts turned to France, to the mud of Crécy, the roar of archers, the cries of the dying. War was not glory. It was duty, honor, and the weight of memory. Yet, when the horn sounded, no knight could refuse. The code demanded it, to defend the realm, the faith, and the weak, even unto death. By noon, they reached the crossroads near Banbury, where a small encampment had already formed. Pennons fluttered above rows of tents. The Earl himself was present, conferring with his captains. Sir Geoffrey dismounted and knelt briefly before him. "My lord," he said. "Rise, Geoffrey, you ride swiftly as ever. What word from the coast?" "Reports are mixed," replied the Earl. "But the French have taken to raiding again. We ride at dawn to meet them. You'll command the second line." "It shall be done." As the sun passed its zenith, the camp hummed with preparation. Armorers hammered dents from cuirasses, bowmen tested their yew staves, cooks stirred great pots of barley stew. Smoke drifted lazily upward, carrying the scent of wood and steel. Sir Geoffrey stood at the edge of the camp, gazing southward. The horizon shimmered in the afternoon haze, as if the land itself held its breath. Tomorrow would bring blood and fire, but today was the calm before the storm. He turned to Thomas, who stood beside the horses. "Remember what I told you," he said. "A knight's strength lies not in his sword arm, but in his purpose. Never forget why we fight." "For the realm and for God," the boy answered. Geoffrey nodded. "Aye, and for honor, that which outlives us all." The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the tents. The clatter of armor softened, replaced by the low murmur of men at prayer. In the distance, a bell tolled from a village church, calling the faithful to evening. Sir Geoffrey watched the light fade, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Tomorrow they would ride into battle, but tonight belonged to silence, reflection, and the quiet strength of duty fulfilled. The dawn broke cold and pale, washing the camp in a thin silver light. Dew clung to the grass, and the mist rolled low over the field like drifting smoke. Men stirred among the tents, shaking the chill from their limbs. The sound of armor being fastened, of bridles jingling, and of muffled prayers filled the air. It was the hour before movement, the solemn breath before the march began. Sir Geoffrey de Moreland stood beside his horse, tightening the last strap of his gauntlet. His squire, Thomas, moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting buckles and checking each joint of mail. "The weather favors us," Geoffrey murmured, glancing toward the east. "A cool wind and clear sky. The Lord grants us a soldier's day." Beyond the ridge, the banners of Warwick fluttered, crimson and white against the morning gray. Men at arms gathered in ordered ranks, their pikes gleaming faintly. Archers strung their longbows, testing the tension of each string with calloused fingers. The smell of oiled leather, horse sweat, and boiled oats filled the camp. Every man knew his place, every task rehearsed through years of discipline. The Earl rode among them, mounted upon a white destrier, his voice carried across the field. Calm, commanding. Men of England, the realm calls once more. We ride to defend our coast and our kin. Stand firm in faith, and let no Frenchman find you wanting. A murmur of assent rippled through the ranks, followed by the metallic thunder of gauntlets striking breastplates. Sir Geoffrey took his place at the head of the second line. His men, veterans and fresh recruits alike, looked to him for steadiness. Keep your eyes forward, he told them. Hold your line, and remember your training. Courage, not rage, wins the day. His words were not shouted, but spoken with the quiet authority of one who had seen too many fields turned red. By the 7th hour, the army began its movement. Trumpets sounded, drums beat a steady rhythm. Columns of men filed from the camp, banners streaming in the wind. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows westward. The clatter of hooves and wheels rolled like distant thunder. What began as chaos became a living machine. Thousands moving as one, bound by duty. The countryside unfolded in waves of green and gold. Villages lined the road, their thatched roofs still damp with dew. Peasants paused from their labor to watch the procession, faces a mix of awe and fear. Children waved timidly, clutching their mothers' skirts. For them, knights were figures of legend, half men, half iron. Few understood the cost of that armor, the weight not only of steel but of expectation. Sir Geoffrey rode in silence. The rhythm of Aldred's gait matched the pounding of his own heart. Around him, the banners snapped in the wind, lions, crosses, and griffins, each sigil a story, a lineage, a pledge. Behind the heraldry lay men of flesh and blood, each with doubts buried beneath their helmets. War, he thought, was never the song poets made it. It was mud, hunger, and the cold touch of fear. At midday, they halted near a small river to rest and water the horses. The soldiers dismounted, loosening straps and wiping the sweat from their brows. Thomas handed his master a flask. You should drink, my lord, he said. Geoffrey nodded, taking a brief swallow before pouring a few drops onto the earth, an old soldier's habit, a silent prayer for those who would not return. He watched the water ripple under the sunlight, reflecting a sky too calm for war. Around him, men spoke in low tones. Some joked, others prayed. One sang softly in a rough Midlands accent, the words lost beneath the creak of leather. Strange, Geoffrey said, how still the world seems, on the edge of battle. Thomas looked puzzled. It feels peaceful, my lord. Geoffrey smiled faintly. Aye, and peace is the cruelest illusion of all. By afternoon, the army had reached the rolling downs north of Hastings. Scouts rode ahead, their cloaks billowing behind them. Reports spoke of French raiders burning villages along the coast, quick strikes and retreats before the English could muster. But this time, the Earl meant to meet them on open ground. Orders spread through the ranks, make camp by sundown, prepare for battle at first light. The camp took form with practiced speed. Men raised tents, dug trenches, and gathered brush for fires. Smiths hammered loose rivets back into place. Squires hauled water from nearby streams. The smell of smoke and stew filled the air once more. Geoffrey oversaw his men's work, inspecting every detail. A loose strap today, he told Thomas, can mean a death blow tomorrow. As dusk settled, the horizon burned red, a warning from the heavens. The men ate in silence, their faces lit by flickering firelight. The sound of a priest chanting Compline drifted through the camp, mingling with the low murmur of men sharpening blades. Geoffrey sat apart, polishing his sword by the dying light. The steel reflected the orange glow of the fire, the edge flawless. Upon the blade, faintly inscribed, were the Latin words Deus Vult, God wills it. Thomas approached quietly, carrying a wooden bowl. Your meal, my lord. Geoffrey took it without looking up. You should rest soon, he said. You'll need steady hands come morning. The boy hesitated. Do you ever feel fear, sir? Geoffrey paused, eyes on the fire. Every man feels fear. The trick is not to let it master you. Remember your duty, and fear becomes just another weight to bear. Later, when the camp had fallen to silence, Geoffrey walked the perimeter, The stars stretched vast above him, cold and eternal. Somewhere beyond those hills, the enemy gathered, men not unlike his own, bound by their own oaths and prayers. He wondered how many of them stared at the same stars, thinking of home. Returning to his tent, he knelt briefly in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, "if I fall, grant me peace. If I live, grant me purpose." He lay down fully armored save for his helm, for a night slept light before battle. The last sound he heard before sleep was the wind sighing through the banners, a restless whisper of the day to come. Night descended over the downs like a dark cloak, heavy and solemn. The fires of the English camp glowed in neat lines, flickering in the cool wind. Beyond their reach, shadows gathered where the fields dipped toward the sea. The men spoke little, even the laughter of the archers, so loud by day, had faded to whispers. All knew what awaited them when the next dawn broke. Sir Geoffrey de Moreland stood outside his tent, the cold air biting against his mail. He gazed southward, where the faint orange haze on the horizon marked the burning of a distant village. The French were close, too close. Their raids had been swift and cruel, leaving smoke where homes once stood. "They strike like ghosts," said a voice beside him. It was Sir Robert Wycliffe, a fellow knight and old comrade. "Aye," Geoffrey replied, "but ghosts vanish when faced with steel." Robert chuckled quietly, though his eyes were grave. "Let us hope the Lord grants us such steel come morning." They spoke no more. Words were scarce before battle. Each man carried his thoughts like a private burden. Some prayed, some sharpened blades, others simply stared into the fire as if it might tell their fate. In the center of the camp, the Earl's pavilion stood larger than the rest, its banners stirring in the wind. Inside, the captains gathered around a rough-hewn table, maps spread before them. By torchlight, the terrain was traced with fingers scarred from years of command. "The French hold the coast road," the Earl said. "We meet them by the ridge. Archers in front, cavalry on the flank. We drive them inland before they burn the next shire." Sir Geoffrey studied the plan in silence. He knew the land well. Rolling hills, narrow passes, and fields of rye tall enough to conceal men. A battle fought here would be swift and brutal. "We'll have the wind at our backs," he said finally. "It will carry the arrows farther." The Earl nodded. "Then let the Lord carry the rest." When the meeting ended, Geoffrey returned to his men. Fires burned low. Faces were pale in their glow. He walked among them, offering quiet words. "Keep your armor dry," he told one. "Check your straps twice." To another, "Pray before you sleep. Courage comes easier to the faithful." His voice was steady, calm, a rock in the tide of fear. Men drew strength from such steadiness more than from any sword. Thomas waited near the tent, polishing his master's helm one last time. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he worked. Geoffrey watched him for a moment before speaking. "Thomas," he said, "tomorrow you'll stay with the baggage line. You'll keep the horses and tend the wounded if they fall back." The squire looked up, startled. "But my lord—" "No argument," Geoffrey interrupted gently. "Your time will come, but not tomorrow." He entered his tent, the canvas whispering in the wind. A small candle flickered beside his sword, its light dancing across the steel. Removing his gauntlets, he sat at the edge of the cot and drew from his pouch a folded scrap of parchment. It was a letter, ink faded, edges worn. He read it quietly, lips barely moving. It was from his wife, written years ago before the plague had taken her. Her words were simple. "Remember that honor does not lie in victory, but in how you face defeat." He folded it carefully and placed it back over his heart. For a moment, the noise of the camp faded, only the sound of wind remained. Geoffrey bowed his head. "Marjorie," he whispered, "watch over me one more day." Outside, the sky cleared, revealing a river of stars. The moon hung low, silvering the armor of sleeping men. Somewhere, a minstrel's soft voice carried across the camp, a ballad of old crusades, of knights and saints long dead. Its melody rose and fell like the tide, haunting and serene. Even the guards paused to listen, their spears glinting pale in the moonlight. Sir Geoffrey stepped out again, unable to sleep. He walked past the lines of tents toward the edge of the hill. From there he could see the dark expanse of the sea, calm and indifferent. "Strange," he murmured, "how peaceful the world seems before it bleeds." He thought of all the mornings he had ridden into battle, the same fear, the same resolve. War changed little, only faces and banners shifted, but the pattern endured. He knelt briefly, pressing his hand to the cold earth. "Lord, grant that I do not falter," he prayed. "Let my sword serve justice, not wrath." His words vanished into the night wind. Behind him, the camp slumbered under the watchful stars, a sea of flickering embers on the dark plain. When he returned, Thomas was still awake. The boy sat cross-legged, staring at the polished helm as though it might reveal some secret of courage. Geoffrey smiled faintly. "You'll learn soon enough," he said. "Courage isn't found in steel. It's in standing when fear tells you to run." He lay down, pulling his cloak over the mail. "Sleep, lad. Tomorrow, the world will test us both." The wind shifted near dawn, carrying the faint scent of salt and smoke. Far off, a horn sounded, not English. The guards sprang to life, their cries echoing through the camp. Geoffrey's eyes opened at once. He rose, already reaching for his sword. "They've come," he said quietly. Thomas froze, pale in the half-light. "The French?" "Aye," Geoffrey answered, "and the day has found us." He stepped into the cold dawn, where the eastern sky blushed red above the hills. Men stumbled from their tents, fastening armor with shaking hands. Trumpets blared, and the camp exploded into motion. Shouts, the clatter of hooves, the clash of metal. The calm night was gone. War had awakened. Sir Geoffrey pulled on his helm, the world narrowing to the slit of his visor. Around him, banners rose in the chill wind, the White Bear of Warwick, the Red Cross of St. George. He swung into the saddle, Aldred stamping and snorting beneath him. "Form the line!" he roared. "Shields up! Archers to the fore!" Across the valley, the French appeared like shadows in the mist, a tide of steel and color. Their drums beat slow and steady, echoing across the plain. Between the two armies stretched a field of damp grass, waiting to be trampled, waiting to drink the day's price. Sir Geoffrey drew his sword. Its blade caught the first light of morning, flashing silver against the gloom. "For England!" cried the Earl. "For God and St. George!" The reply thundered from 1,000 throats, rolling like storm over the hills. The archers moved forward, bows bending as they drew. The sky filled with the hiss of arrows, dark rained against the dawn. The battle had begun. The valley before Hastings shuddered beneath the roar of war. The morning mist, once soft and pale, had become a veil for death. Through it surged the armies, banners snapping, steel gleaming like lightning. The air smelled of sweat, mud, and iron. The cry of men and horses mingled into one vast, unending sound, as though the earth itself had begun to scream. Sir Geoffrey de Moreland rode at the head of his company, sword raised high. His destrier, Aldred, thundered forward through the churned grass, its muscles slick with foam. To his left rode Sir Robert Wycliffe, visor down, lance couched tight beneath his arm. The English line advanced with grim precision, their banners rippling like waves in a crimson sea. Behind them, the archers loosed another volley. Arrows whistled overhead, a black rain cutting down through the mist. The French front ranks staggered as men fell, impaled or pierced clean through their mail. Yet still they came, shouting curses in their tongue, their shields lifted high. Drums beat faster, horns blared, and the two tides met in thunderous collision. The first shock of impact rattled the bones. Swords struck shields, lances shattered on breastplates. Men were thrown from horses, trampled under hooves. The clang of iron on iron filled the air, punctuated by the raw cries of the wounded. Geoffrey's blade bit deep into a French knight's shoulder, shearing through mail and flesh. He wrenched it free, turning in the saddle to block another blow. A mace crashed against his shield, splintering the rim. Aldred reared, hooves lashing out, striking the enemy's horse square in the chest. Both beasts screamed, the air thick with chaos. Geoffrey's vision narrowed to fragments, flashes of steel, the glint of blood, the roar of his heartbeat. War was no longer glory, it was noise and survival. He pushed forward through the melee, shouting commands to his men. "Hold the line! Press the flank!" The English formation began to pivot, catching the French between two converging wings. Archers repositioned behind them, loosing arrows at near point-blank range. The enemy faltered. For a heartbeat, victory seemed within reach. Then came the countercharge. From the French rear rode a new wave, heavy cavalry bearing the fleur-de-lis, armored head to toe. They struck like a hammer. The English right buckled under the weight, Geoffrey saw the banners of Warwick dip and vanish amid the crush. "Rally to me," he shouted, spurring Aldred into the fray. He met the charge head-on. The world became a blur of movement and noise. His sword clashed with another knight's, sparks flying from the impact. The man's helm split open under a second blow, his body tumbling from the saddle. Geoffrey wheeled his horse, breath ragged inside the stifling helm. Sweat dripped into his eyes, salt and grime mixing with the sting of iron. Somewhere to his right, Sir Robert fell. Geoffrey saw him go down beneath two French riders, his banner torn from his grasp. Rage flared in his chest. He forced Aldred toward the spot, hacking left and right. The horse's hooves crushed bodies underfoot. He reached Robert too late. The man's lifeless eyes stared skyward, reflecting the white clouds of morning. There was no time to mourn. The fight closed in again, tighter and tighter. Men grappled at sword's length, striking, shoving, clawing through the mud. Shields were lost, blades dulled, hands slick with blood. Geoffrey drove his pommel into a foe's visor, then swung down to finish him. His shoulder burned from strain, but his arm did not slow. Trumpets blared from the rear, a signal. The Earl's reserve was moving in. The fresh line surged forward, crashing into the exhausted French flank. The tide began to turn once more. Geoffrey seized the moment. "Forward! Drive them back!" he roared. His men rallied to his cry, pressing the advantage. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the enemy line began to crumble. Horses broke and fled. Footmen threw down their arms. The field that had moments ago been a storm of motion now sank into chaos. Screams, smoke, and the broken rhythm of retreat. Yet victory was not without cost. The ground was carpeted with the fallen, English and French alike, their banners tangled in the mud. Geoffrey reined in his horse, chest heaving. His sword arm trembled with exhaustion, his shield little more than a wreck of splinters. All around him, the cries of the wounded filled the air. A squire stumbled past, dragging a half-conscious man from beneath a fallen destrier. The smell of blood was everywhere, thick, metallic, nauseating. The Earl rode up through the haze, his armor dented and stained. "Well fought, Geoffrey," he called. "They're in full retreat toward the shore. We've held the field." Geoffrey raised his sword weakly in salute, though his expression remained grave. "Victory in name only," he thought. "Too many dead to call it triumph." As the last of the fighting faded, he dismounted and walked among the wounded. Some called his name, others reached for his hand. He knelt beside one, a young archer, his leg torn by a blade. "Peace, lad," Geoffrey said softly. "You've done your duty." The boy's eyes fluttered closed, a faint smile on his lips. Thomas appeared then, breathless and pale. "My lord, you're alive!" He grasped Geoffrey's arm, almost sobbing. "I feared." "Enough," Geoffrey interrupted gently. "Help tend the injured. The battle's done, but the work remains." The boy nodded, wiping his eyes before hurrying off. By evening, the field lay silent save for the groans of the dying and the cawing of distant crows. Fires burned along the ridge as the survivors gathered to tend their wounds. The sky above was streaked with crimson, the same hue as the earth below. Geoffrey stood amid it all, weary and hollow. He removed his helm, letting the cool wind touch his face. His hair was matted with sweat and dust. For a moment, he simply breathed, deep, ragged breaths that tasted of iron and smoke. The setting sun cast long shadows across the field, stretching over the fallen like shrouds. Sir Geoffrey sheathed his sword at last. Around him, priests moved among the bodies, murmuring prayers for the dead. Some soldiers knelt in silence, others stared blankly, lost between exhaustion and disbelief. In war, he thought, even the victors are broken. As the darkness deepened, he turned his gaze toward the sea. There, on the distant horizon, faint shapes moved, the sails of the retreating French. The wind carried the sound of their departure, a hollow echo fading into night. The invasion had been repelled, at least for now, but Geoffrey felt no triumph, only the ache of survival and the weight of memory. He looked down at his hands, bruised, bloodied, trembling, and whispered, "May God forgive us all." Dawn rose pale over the battlefield, as if the sun itself hesitated to shine upon such ruin. The mists clung low over the ground, hiding the broken forms of men and horses alike. Ravens circled above, their cries sharp and hollow. The wind stirred banners half buried in mud, each one a silent testament to the cost of pride and kingship. Sir Geoffrey de Morland stood upon the ridge, wrapped in his cloak. His armor was dented, dried with the stains of battle. Beneath him, the field stretched in grim stillness, a sea of bodies, twisted and unmoving. He had seen death before, yet never in such number, never so close to the marrow of despair. Around him moved the survivors, soldiers, priests, and squires, all laboring with quiet resolve. Fires burned to keep the morning chill at bay. Some men searched for lost comrades, others carried the wounded to makeshift tents along the stream. From there rose the low moans of pain and the scent of boiling herbs. Geoffrey walked among them, offering a word here, a gesture there. Many bowed or murmured blessings as he passed, though few met his eyes. To them, he was both savior and reminder, the man who led them through hell and out the other side, but not all had returned. He came upon a row of fallen knights, laid side by side, each covered with a cloak. Sir Robert Wycliffe lay among them. Geoffrey knelt, his hand resting upon the man's still chest. "You fought well, my brother," he whispered. "The Lord grant you rest." A squire placed Robert's sword atop the cloak, its edge dulled, its hilt dark with blood. At noon, the Earl of Warwick gathered his captains beneath the battered standard. His voice was hoarse, his face gaunt with exhaustion. "The enemy retreats across the Channel. England holds firm," he said, "but we have paid dearly. Let none forget the price of this day." The men nodded in silence, their eyes fixed upon the ground. Geoffrey spoke quietly. "We should send riders to each shire, my lord. Families will seek word." The Earl agreed, his nod weary. "See it done. Sir Geoffrey, you are to oversee the field, the burials, the count of the dead." It was not an honor, it was a burden. Yet Geoffrey bowed his head in assent. Through the afternoon, the work began. Graves were dug upon the hillside where the grass still grew. The priests moved among them, chanting Latin prayers over rows of nameless dead. Helmets were removed so faces might be known, rings and crests collected for their kin. The earth drank deeply of blood and sorrow that day. Thomas worked beside Geoffrey, his hands raw and shaking. "So many, my lord," he murmured. "Will it ever end?" Geoffrey paused, leaning upon his spade. "Not in our time, lad. But each grave is a promise, that others may live without making more." Thomas looked at him, eyes glistening, and nodded. By evening, the western sky burned with streaks of gold and crimson. Smoke from funeral pyres rose to meet the fading light, turning the air into a haze of ash and flame. The scent of it clung to every breath, the mingling of incense and death. Geoffrey stood beside the first mound, helm under his arm, lips moving in silent prayer. A priest approached, his robes darkened by soot. "You grieve for them, Sir Knight?" he asked softly. Geoffrey's gaze did not waver. "I grieve for what we have become." The priest nodded slowly. "Then you have not lost your soul. Guard it well. War takes more than life." That night, the camp was quiet. Men sat around the fires, sharpening blades that would see no battle for months. Others played at dice or whispered stories to chase away the ghosts. Geoffrey took no part in it. He sat apart, tending his armor by the dim glow of the embers. Each dent, each scar upon the steel spoke its own truth. He thought of his home, the manor at Kentmere, the orchard by the stream, his wife Eleanor and their 2 sons. Did they still wait by the window each dusk, listening for the sound of hooves on the road? He longed to believe so. Yet war had a way of stealing time, turning seasons into lifetimes. Thomas approached quietly, holding a wooden bowl of broth. "You should eat, my lord." Geoffrey took it with a faint smile. "You've grown into a fine squire. Thomas, you've earned your spurs twice over." The boy flushed with pride, though his eyes still held the shadow of the battlefield. "I only followed your lead." Geoffrey nodded. "Then learn this. The greatest victory is to stand again after the fall." When sleep finally came, it was filled with echoes, the clash of steel, the cries of dying men, the flapping of ravens' wings. He woke before dawn, breath ragged, heart heavy. The world outside his tent was still wrapped in mist, and the fires had burned low to ash. As the sun broke once more, Geoffrey climbed the ridge again. The graves stretched below like silent lines of soldiers still on watch. The banners placed above them stirred gently in the morning wind. Somewhere, A lark began to sing, fragile, defiant, alive. He knelt and pressed his hand to the earth. "Rest now, brothers," he murmured. "Your fight is done. Ours continues." For a moment, the weight of command lifted. The field no longer seemed a place of death, but of memory, sacred ground bought with courage and pain. When he rose, the Earl awaited him with new orders. "We march north at week's end," the older man said. "The realm must see its defenders stand strong. You'll ride with me to London for the King's Council." Geoffrey bowed slightly. "As you command, my lord." Yet his heart lingered upon the mounds behind them. As they rode out days later, the battlefield faded into mist once more. Only the wind remained, whispering through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of ash and iron, the perfume of valor and loss. Geoffrey did not look back, though he felt its presence always at his back, like a shadow he could never outrun. The journey home began beneath a leaden sky. The road wound through villages half emptied by the levee, past fields left untended since spring. Smoke rose from distant hearths, thin, uncertain threads against the cold horizon. The men rode in silence, their banners furled, armor dulled with rust and blood. Victory had given them no joy, only weariness that clung like frost to their bones. Sir Geoffrey de Moreland rode at the head of the column. The weight of his sword felt heavier than it had on any battlefield. Each hoofbeat echoed in his mind, a slow, relentless rhythm marking the distance between who he had been and who he had become. Thomas followed close behind, the young squire's face pale but steady, his eyes still learning the language of grief. When they reached the castle of Kentmere, the gates opened in solemn silence. The guards saluted their lord with heavy hearts. No cheers rose, no horns sounded, for even the peasants knew of Hastings and the price paid there. Women and children lined the walls, their faces pale with fear and hope entwined. Lady Eleanor descended the steps to meet him, her gown simple, her expression composed. Geoffrey dismounted slowly, his legs stiff from the long ride. For a heartbeat, words failed him. Then she placed her hand upon his cheek, and all the formality between them melted away. "You've returned," she whispered. "By God's grace." He bowed his head, unable to speak. That evening, a quiet feast was held in the great hall. The hearth blazed, but its warmth seemed faint against the chill in the air. At the high table, Geoffrey sat beside the Earl of Warwick, who had come to deliver the king's gratitude. Minstrels sang softly of valor and divine favor, yet the songs rang hollow to the ears of men who had seen the field. When the formalities ended, Warwick rose. "England stands because of men such as you, Sir Geoffrey," he said. "The king knows your name, and so shall his court. He bids you ride to London within the fortnight." Geoffrey inclined his head. "I am his servant, my lord. But my men need rest, and burial for those who did not return." Later, when the hall had emptied, Geoffrey walked alone through the corridors of stone. The torches flickered, casting long shadows along the walls hung with faded banners. Each crest and color seemed to whisper of a younger time, when knighthood still felt pure. He found himself in the chapel, kneeling before the altar. The candles burned low, their light trembling upon the crucifix. Geoffrey bowed his head, his voice little more than breath. "Lord, grant peace to those I failed. Let their souls find what mine cannot." The silence that followed was vast. No answer came, only the soft creak of wood and the sigh of the wind beyond the glass. Days passed. The wounded were tended. Letters were written to widows and fathers. Thomas oversaw the mustering of the remaining squires. His youth hardened into something quieter. Geoffrey spent his hours inspecting the armory, counting spears and mending harnesses. Routine was his refuge, each task a barrier against thought. One afternoon, he rode beyond the walls to the northern fields. The air was sharp, the sky pale as steel. There, among the leafless oaks, he dismounted and removed his gauntlets. The land lay sleeping, peaceful, untouched by war. Yet in his mind, he still saw the valley of Hastings, the smoke, the cries, the endless motion of death. He drew his sword and drove it point first into the ground. The blade quivered, catching the thin light of the sun. "This steel has drunk too deeply," he murmured. "And still, men call it noble." He sank to one knee, his breath clouding in the cold air. The silence of the countryside pressed upon him until even his heartbeat seemed loud. That night, Lady Eleanor found him in the solar, gazing into the fire. "You've not slept," she said softly. "I cannot," he replied. "When I close my eyes, I see their faces. Robert, the boy with the broken bow, all of them." She laid a hand upon his shoulder. "You carry them because you must, but do not let their ghosts steal what is left of you." Her words lingered in him. Yet when dawn came, he rose and donned his armor again, not for war, but for duty. He rode with his escort toward London to report before the King's Council. The journey took 3 days, the road lined with villages where life struggled to begin anew. Everywhere he passed, people paused to watch, whispering blessings or fears. At Westminster, the great hall was alive with the sound of politics. Parchment rustling, courtiers murmuring, messengers rushing through the archways. When Geoffrey entered, the king's steward announced his name with solemn dignity. The king, seated upon his high dais, regarded him with eyes that seemed far older than his years. "You've done England a great service," the king said. "The field at Hastings shall be remembered for generations. Tell me, Sir Geoffrey, what remains of the enemy?" Geoffrey bowed low. "They are broken, Your Grace. Their fleet scatters, but the cost has been grievous. Our strength is thin, our people weary." The king's gaze softened. "And you, my knight, are you unbroken?" Geoffrey hesitated. "I stand, sire, but the soul stands slower than the body." A faint smile crossed the monarch's lips. "Then stand still, and let time do its work. England shall heal, and so must her sons." That night, in his quarters, Geoffrey removed his armor and set it upon the stand. It gleamed faintly in the candlelight, scarred, dented, and real. He touched the breastplate, remembering every sound it had borne: the clash of swords, the cries of men, the thunder of hooves. He whispered a single vow: never again for glory, only for need. Outside, London slept beneath a winter moon. The bells of St. Paul's tolled midnight, slow and solemn. Geoffrey stood by the window, watching the mist rise from the Thames. The world was at peace, for now. Yet he knew peace was but the breath between storms. He turned away from the window, extinguished the light, and whispered a final prayer. Not for victory, nor for honor, but for forgiveness. And in the stillness that followed, for the first time since Hastings, he allowed himself to sleep. The council chamber was vast and cold, its stone walls echoing every footstep. Sir Geoffrey de Morland entered with measured pace, his armor left behind for the cloth doublet of a courtier. Around the long table, the king's advisers debated taxes, levies, and coastal defenses. Each word was sharp with ambition, yet far removed from the soil and blood of Hastings. Geoffrey listened in silence, watching how men spoke of strategy without seeing the cost. Names were numbers. Villages were lines on a ledger. The king spoke with authority, yet even he could not mask the fear beneath the crown. Geoffrey's hand rested upon the hilt of a dagger, not for violence, but for grounding, a reminder of what had truly mattered. A young knight spoke next, his voice bright with idealism. "Sir Geoffrey," he said, "your deeds inspire us. Teach us how to fight, how to honor the code, how to carry England's sword." Geoffrey nodded slowly. "I will teach you," he replied, "but remember, honor is more than skill. Courage without conscience is death disguised as glory." Through the day, he advised on fortifications and troop placements, his words measured and precise. Yet always, his mind returned to Hastings, the faces of fallen friends, the groans of the wounded, the rivers of mud and blood. Even in triumph, he understood that war leaves no one unscarred. When the council adjourned, Geoffrey rode through the streets of London. The city buzzed with commerce, its people alive with fear and hope intertwined. He passed children playing near the Thames, women washing clothes in the river, merchants shouting their wares. Life persisted, indifferent to the deeds of knights and kings. Returning to Kentmere, he found the castle quiet, its walls holding centuries of stone and memory. Lady Eleanor met him at the gate, her eyes soft with welcome. Thomas and the remaining squires tended horses in polished armor, their youth tempered by the lessons of war. Geoffrey's gaze lingered on the courtyard, imagining all he had seen and all he had lost. Days turned to weeks. Geoffrey inspected the fields, oversaw repairs to the armory, and guided the young knights under his tutelage. He spoke often of Hastings, not in tales of heroism, but of duty, vigilance, and sorrow. His voice carried the weight of truth. that courage and fear must coexist, and that every victory demands a price. One evening, he climbed the hill overlooking the countryside. The sun sank behind distant ridges, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Geoffrey removed his helm, letting the wind caress his face. The fields below were peaceful now, yet he felt the weight of memory in every step, the echo of swords in every heartbeat. Lady Eleanor joined him, her hand resting lightly upon his arm. "You've done enough, my lord," she said. Geoffrey nodded, though he knew the lesson of peace was harder than that of battle. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but duty never sleeps." They stood in silence, watching the light fade as the world settled into evening. In the quiet of the great hall, Geoffrey knelt in prayer. Not for glory, nor for accolades, but for those who had fallen and those who would follow. His sword lay sheathed before the altar, a relic of storms survived. He whispered a vow that had grown with each day of service, to live with honor, to teach with patience, and to guard the peace that his arms had won. Winter passed, and with it came the first soft snows over Kentmere. Geoffrey walked among the orchards and fields, now restored, the scars of battles softened by frost and memory. Villagers greeted him with quiet reverence, children waved shyly, and Thomas tended the horses with steady hands. Life moved slowly, almost painfully, yet it moved forward. At last, Geoffrey retired to his chamber, removing the last pieces of armor he would ever wear. He laid them carefully upon the stand, the dents and scratches a testament to service fulfilled. The firelight flickered across the steel, illuminating a life of vigilance, courage, and sacrifice. He sank into his chair, weary but unbroken, the weight of years pressing gently upon him. He gazed out the window at the moonlit fields, the world still and peaceful for a rare moment. Memories of Hastings drifted before him like smoke, faces, cries, and the unyielding rhythm of war. Yet now, he saw also the future. The young knights he had taught, the orchards his family tended, the village children who would never know the fear he had known. Geoffrey whispered a final prayer, not for himself, but for all who had borne the sword in the cost of honor. The wind carried it softly across the land. The banners of Kentmere hung still, the castle walls solid, and the hearth burned steadily in the hall. For the first time in many seasons, Sir Geoffrey allowed himself to rest. And so ended the day and the chapter of one knight's life. Not in the thunder of battle, nor in the shouts of victory, but in the quiet reflection of duty fulfilled, of loyalty kept, and of peace hard won. The knight lived, not as a hero of song, but as a man of England, steadfast, weary, and true. The night closed gently over Kentmere. Sir Geoffrey de Moreland slept at last, the weight of sword and shield lifted. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint promise that though war would return, so too would those who, like him, stood in its place, enduring, remembering, and resting at last.